All right, everyone, so we're headed into the next session, which is going to be the latest developments on legal entity identifiers. Your moderator will be our own Jochen Bartels, along with Stephan Wolf, who is the CEO of the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. Back by popular demand, we have Anthony Scriffignano, also back, Phil Cotter, and we have Ho Eng Ban, who is the Director Asia Pacific for CUSIP. So I'll hand it over to the capable hands of Jochen to run you through the session.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good morning. And of course, welcome to our discussion about the efforts of the GLEIF Foundation to introduce the Legal Entity Identifier. And I have to say I had problems with my spell check this morning and it wanted to say lie. So we certainly don't want to create an image that the legal identifier is a lie. In 2015, at the 10th anniversary of BIIA, our good friend and supporter Michael Ritter from the German Central Bank and a board member of GLEIF presented actually the legal entity identifier concept, and he encouraged our industry members to participate in this program. Well, it is my understanding that hardly anybody, any support has come from the information industry. Is that correct? At least my information is correct. Since it was decided to put the subject of identity on the program of this year's conference, we thought it was high time to learn about the latest developments of the legal entity identifier, especially since GLEIF was seeking a mandate for the use of BIIA in the financial system. So we have invited Stephan Wolf, the CEO of the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, who has been tasked by the Financial Stability Board to support the implementation and the use of the legal identifier. And of course, we thank Stephan for accepting our invitation. We are indeed interested to know whether GLEIF is still seeking the cooperation of the business information industry, and if so, would we then be interested to enter into a discussion? And I caution you, we don't have enough time to really dig into whether yes or no, but at least what we can do today is to kickstart a discussion and to determine whether there's an appetite by our members to do so. Initially, we thought it was appropriate that we have some segments of our, what we call the information infrastructure. So we approached the Corporate Registers Forum, which is an association of international corporate registries, to participate in our discussion. And since they are the providers of the raw material for our industry, we thought that would be appropriate. Well, I think they chickened out because they declined our invitation. So the second group we wanted to invite was somebody from the user group. And I could think of nobody was more important at the moment, like the credit insurers, who represent a real powerful user community. Well, they remain skeptical about the use of the lie, and they chickened out as well. So we got help from our friend Mark Barragine, who's recommended that we include in the discussion Eng Ban Ho, a director of CUSIP, responsible for Asia Pacific. And the reason why, because apparently he worked from the beginning with the lie concept in the organization, so he should tell us a little bit more about it. And of course, in order to get some help in the discussion, I ran to my friends Phil Cotter and Anthony Refinitiv to liven up the discussion.
Because we're shy.
So, Stephan, please make your presentation and make your case.
Thank you, Achim, and welcome from my side as well. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start with one of the most pressing issues we all face today, and that is, should we wear a tie or not when you go to presentations like this? And when you look around, we have a 50-50 vote here at the moment. I actually decided to wear a tie in order, well, I hope it makes me look slimmer. That's really something. Yeah, my name is Stephan Wolf. I'm the CEO of the GLEIF, the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, as Joachim pointed out. And we heard in the last panel a lot about issues around identity and matching and mapping and AI and so on and so forth. And I found it really interesting that no one on stage, on the panel, mentioned the LEI as a part of a solution. We would like to fix this now in our discussion. The Global Legal Entity Foundation, a spin-off of the FSB and heavily overseen by 71 regulators from all around the world. We have 18 directors coming from the private sector, also from all around the world, so that we have real good coverage on and know-how on the various aspects where we are. GLEIF itself is a very small organization. We're not issuing LEIs. We're actually managing a network of partners who are trusted by the industry, that they issue the LEI with their local knowledge in a federated network. Our job in this area is to manage this network, to check for compliance, for all the quality concerns that people might address. So we have a guardian and gatekeeper kind of role. In just a few years, we managed 1.5 million legal entities to be registered. And I'll show you a world map in a second. And that's quite amazing because it started from nowhere. Please remember, the LEI system was created in the aftermath of the Lehman crisis, where nobody knew back then, whom they're doing business with. And the regulator said this has to stop, this has to be more transparent. The LEI itself is a dumb number. Nothing special, nothing spectacular about it, 20-digit alphanumeric code with no semantics. The real value is in the identity describing attributes, which is on the right side, our data model. All of this is explained in depth on our website. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I would like to share with you one experience when people ask me, for what do we need an LEI? What they usually come up with is, I have my identity in my country. So we all have an identity. A legal entity has a business registry number, tax number, you name it, EIN in the United States and so on. So for what do we need an LEI? And my answer is very simple. For what do I need a passport? I cannot travel without a passport. So there is a use case that is cross-border. And obviously the world has agreed on a passport for allowing us to travel from one country to the other. And so the LEI, the biggest advantage that the LEI brings to the markets is in any kind of cross-border transaction. Could be financial transaction, could be exchange of physical goods, could be anything. But we don't stop there. We're not just having the identity of the legal entity, we also know about the owners of that legal entity, as long as the owners themselves are legal entities. So we're not into natural persons. The LEI is not for individuals, only for legal entities, but that gives you the hierarchy of large corporates around the world, which is also a very important information, for instance, in risk management. The LEI came from the derivative space. The meltdown was there with Lehman and others. And I think we can tick the box. The regulators did a great job in deploying rules around the world for mandating counterparties of derivatives transactions. I hear that Hong Kong, Singapore on board. We hear that Japan is coming about, and that would mean global coverage of the major markets. It was actually Europe who took the lead to take this a little bit further. When you look at the map, Europe said, why stopping at derivatives transactions? Why not extending this to any kind of securities transaction? So all issuers and all counterparties of any financial instrument transaction in Europe must have an LEI. And that created the situation that the gold mine on the Philippines, where their stock is traded in, for instance, Frankfurt or London, must also have an LEI, even though they're not located in Europe. And that's why you see all the spots around on the world. I mean, the dominant countries are the US and Europe for mandates for the LEI, but many others in other countries also have an LEI. And I would like to highlight 2 or 3 developments for the relevance and why we're now here and why we're going to Asia now. First of all, there are countries like India, for instance, who issued rules that LEIs are needed for credit borrowers. Nothing to do with financial transaction, credit borrowers. China created a rule, which we found fascinating, that for 29 countries in the world, they would only accept the LEI for import-export declarations. And we're working together with a number of customs organizations around the world who would like to do similar things. So it's spreading out, and here with the Asian Development Bank, and there was a study they conducted, they just published a new one today, actually, or yesterday, by finding out how easy or how difficult it is to obtain an LEI in Asia. Answer is it was very easy. So ADB is a big supporter of the LEI, especially for trade finance. But also the World Bank. The World Bank looked into the LEI for countering or for helping with ML regimes or anti-terrorist financing regimes, and they believe, as written in their report, that the LEI could have tremendous value there. We know that always the bad guys are people, in the world. But people usually use vehicles registered somewhere in order to masquerade what they're doing. It's the case we heard this morning where one jumps from $1,000 to $7,000 might not be the most significant problem, but people having registered companies all around the world with no transparency of what's going on, that could be a real issue. Now, our ambition is a little bit bigger. We have roughly 200 to 400 million legal entities on the planet. Companies like MasterCard and Visa have over 200 million on file. We believe out of this population, 40 to 50 million are engaged in global trade. The number is rising through to international exchange of goods. So 40 to 50 million is the next target group, of which we want to achieve 20 million plus over the course of the next few years. And I would like to explain a little bit how we're going to do this. If you look at this chart, on the right side, you see many use cases for the LEI. Everybody loves the LEI because once you have one, it's so easy. You can do this in any kind of form. You can embed this in digital certificates. You can use it in blockchain. You can, e-invoicing, all kinds of e-commerce applications. If there were enough LEIs, everybody would use it. The LEI is for free for the user. Everybody can download the data. No secrets there. The problem is how to get to more LEIs. So far, this was driven by regulation. So you see on the left side, the mandates thing. That's not our job. That's the job of the policymakers, the legislators, and our oversight committee has a major role in that because they're the policymakers for the LEI. We are looking for voluntary adoption. Voluntary adoption could be through member states, issuing the LEIs for all companies registered in the country. I would like to highlight that this is in discussion at the moment in the UK, where the Bank of England suggested that for Companies House, as well as Bank of England is going to use the LEI in payment messages. Or we can go to the other side, to the private sector, voluntary adoption through people who have similar problems to solve, and that is the banks and mainly certificate authorities for digital IDs. So these organizations have pretty big customer diligence processes in place, where we're thinking if we can align those processes, we can take a lot of cost out of the system, the global system. So we're reaching out now to companies like banks and bank consortia predominantly. It's on the two on the left side, KYC utilities and others who are in that space, to engage with them in the inclusion of their processes with the LEI system. So basically it means we're reaching out to banks and discuss with them whether every of their clients should have an LEI. And I'm very pleased to tell you that we run already 2 very large pilot projects. We did a study together with McKinsey. They reached out globally to over 100 people in interviews, and the overwhelming response was so positive. There were lots of questions, of course. How can you do this and that, and legal, blah, blah, blah. But in the end of the day, I think we'll see huge progress there, getting us to the 20 million plus LEIs soon. These were the interviews conducted by McKinsey. On our website, brand new, is an ebook describing the results and the findings, and the main finding is one number. The banks alone, if they would deploy the LEI across all business processes, the banks alone could save an astronomical $2 to $4 billion a year just by deploying the number. So that is enough bottom line result for people to start thinking about it, and we were supporting that. Now, the McKinsey study gave us 4 recommendations. One is the LEI becoming the linchpin, the data connector. That's why we reach out to the data vendor community to work with us together on standard mapping programs. And we will hear one later today here on stage. The other one we're running at the moment is with Swift. So the big code and the LEI are standardized mappings available on both the Swift and the GLEIF website. We want to change the business model. That is what I just described together with the banks. We want to educate more because many people might have not heard about the LEI. So this is why I'm here as part of that. And we also want to think about, how we can lower the burden for everyone. I mean, today the registrants have to pay a small fee for an LEI, but even that is considered a burden. You have to apply for one, you have to check it on the website, you have to renew it. Can we streamline that with the help of our banks, banking partners, in order to take away the burden from all the SMEs? And our ultimate dream is that every legal entity in the world has an LEI for free. We'll see how far we can get in there. And thank you very much, and I'm looking forward now to join the panel.
Sorry, we should have bought more mics. Before we dive into the discussion, let me point out a very important aspect. This is an industry association discussion. Please do not expect that there will be any recommendation or position statement by any of our members. We want to keep this as a discussion amongst individuals, professionals, to see whether there is any merit for our association members to participate in this effort, or whether everybody wants to go their own way. We also I have to be the policeman here. We cannot drift into pricing discussions. I mean, this is all understood. So we have Eng Ban here, who seems to be the only one among, or actually apart from me, to be very familiar with the LEI, and should give us a very brief overview how he got involved and what he's doing with the LEI. And a particular question I have to you, since you, CUSIP is working with the American Bank Association, what's their position about the legal identifier?
Thank you, Joachim. First of all, thanks for inviting CGS or CUSIP Global Services to this panel. Before I go on to the specific, let me just give everyone a definition of what we do in CUSIP Global Services and the American Bank Association as well. So CGS or CUSIP Global Services is managed on behalf of the American Bank Association by S&P Global Market Intelligence. The relationship actually goes back 51 years ago when it was actually created to solve a industry-wide issue. So at that time, the New York Clearing House, they were drowning in tons of paper in terms of trading. Can you imagine back then everything was traded via paper? So the settlement period was actually 2 weeks. So if you buy your stocks in IBM today, you will only get your accountant to verify that it's in your books 2 weeks later. So that's an issue. So they approached the American Banker Association, who had a department of automation at that time. similar to our modern-day IT department. So a committee was actually set up to look into this issue. So a committee was named, Committee on Uniform Security Identifier Procedure. So the CUSIP names, is taken after that committee. So the 9-character number, or alphanumeric number, was created and assigned to all the securities that were traded in New York Stock Exchange at the time. And that number is made machine readable, so it's been used ever since. And then you can imagine, the volume at New York Stock Exchange just, skyrocketed after that, because settling and clearing is so simple, because, machine readable and all that. So that's the background. We are also part of the Association of National Numbering Agency. We issue the local number for North American markets, and the ISINs, which we're going to talk about later on, for 35 other countries. So how we get involved in LEI, Legal Entity Identifier. After the financial crisis that happened in the US post-Lehman, as what Stephan has mentioned, the pre-LOU stage before the formation of GLEIF, we worked with the DTCC, Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation of the US, in partnership to issue LEI at that time. That relationship actually gone back since 2012. At that time, on the pre-LOU basis, we have created close to about 13,000 LEI. And the ultimate reason for that is basically to know who is who, as what Stephan has mentioned, and who owns what. Giving you that parent, grandparent, and then the child relationship between the entities. So that's the background that we have. And over here in Asia Pac, I can talk a little bit more later with Stephan's guidance as well, how the adoption is actually more, I would say, I always like to say, the sun rises from the east and sets in the west, but when it comes to regulation, it's the other way around. So with that, yeah, Joachim, thanks.
Well, thank you very much. So I have a very, very burning question about the identifiers. We just, in our industry, have witnessed during the past 5 years, companies came out of nowhere, which we learned, and created the identity, a new identity segment of our business. And Phil Cotter is in one of them, and enjoying an enormous amount of growth, like double-digit. Some say even more than 20%, while the traditional information people, they go around and happy to have 5%. So when you look at these people, they all work without a legal identifier. They have their own identifier or none at all. I just asked Stephan Uffeld when he left the podium, he said, you are checking 200 million companies and no identifier. And he said, yes, I don't need an identifier. So I'm asking all of you, why do we need a legal identifier? Just why do we need it? Everybody is sourcing data in a different way. So you want to start? Anthony?
I think that there's the why do we need it? How realistic is the request to need it? And what would it mean if such a thing existed? So this sounds anti-LEI. It's not at all. We had a great exchange before. I think that there are stable numbering systems around the world. Most of them are either government agencies or registries. They're paid for. The idea of having something that is free to the consumer is a great idea. The challenge, the massive challenge of getting that right, the overwhelming complexity of identity, the reality that most entities are small. When we think about identity resolution, we use examples like Huawei and Apple and United Airlines. That's not the problem. The problem is Joe's Hat Company. The problem is the small and medium enterprise, the problem which is more than 80% of entities. So as a computer scientist, and I will say by way of positioning, I'm not saying that this is a bad idea. I'm just saying you have to think about the enormity of this problem. I'm a primary inventor on scores of patents in identity resolution. So I speak from a position of expertise around the complexity of this problem, especially when you bring in other languages, you bring in bad behavior and malfeasance, you bring in people's intentions versus their expectations versus what they do when they opt in and opt out. There are financial considerations, but if you take that away, the functional idea of having something that's unique and unambiguous, those are the two critical characteristics, unique and unambiguous. No one-to-many, no many-to-one. Check. Got it. Great. Then you get to persistent key, no significance, essentially a random number. Check. Got it. And so now we're following all the rules of computer science. That's great. Then you get to the usefulness of it. Is it ubiquitous and discoverable? Can I find it when I need it? Is it everywhere? Getting there. I think that's great. Check. Value add, linkage, part of some broader system. All of these things make sense if you can achieve them. But what do you have to believe to make all of that happen is a totally different story. I love the analogy of the driver's license and the passport, or the identity card and the passport. The reality is the passport is only the recognition of me by my country. It's not necessarily a guarantee that the country I'm trying to go to will recognize that. That's why we have visas, right? So there's complexity in everything, and the reality of everything is where that it's the devil in the details. So should we do this? Can we do this? Two very different questions. The third point that you bring up, which is what problem are we solving? So about half of all small business identity changes in some way in a year. There's some change to the primary indicia of identity. That's an alarming rate of decay. Where people want to go with this is, well, just give me a number and I'll create a crosswalk and I'll look up that number and I'll know exactly who I'm dealing with. All true information is not simultaneously true. You're looking at what was true at the time that you created that. If you can do this in a dynamic way, if you can do this as a microservice, if you can do this with fresh current data, if there's some mandate that that data be true, if the mandate that that data be true is equally accepted, that's a lot of ifs, then there's some reason behind this.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. First of all, in full disclosure, so Refinitiv are part of the industry body that works with GLEIF. We deliver LEI through our systems to customers, primarily because of MiFID regulation in Europe. Look, I think there's nothing wrong with the concept of a global legal entity identifier. However, I think the challenges that Anthony referred to are significant. Yeah. Let's take the KYC process, which we talked about in the previous panel. I can tell you now that the lack of a legal entity identifier is not the obstacle to creating KYC utilities. The obstacle is verified data that is kept up to date over time, because identities are not immutable, they're constantly changing. And I think one of the challenges that I would pose to Stephan is, how is the LEI going to link to verified data, particularly for highly regulated purposes like KYC? How is the data going to be kept up to date? I read with interest that the UK government is potentially thinking of Companies House issuing LEIs. Well, Companies House is notorious for not verifying the data that's lodged in its database. It doesn't have the capacity to do that, right? Recently, there was quite a bit of press about a little old lady in Scotland who had set up 80,000 shell companies in the space of a year to facilitate money laundering. Okay, so, you know, we need to be clear about what it is we're trying to achieve. We need to be clear about how we're going to do that. And we need to be clear as to who in the industry is going to benefit from this at the end of the day. I think one of the big obstacles to mass adoption is, yes, I can see an opportunity for the banks to save money. But funnily enough, not a lot of their customers are necessarily interested in that. Okay. What do the corporations who get an LEI, what does the SME who get an LEI benefit as a result of that? Because frankly, they've already got enough unique identifiers. They've got a tax number, they've got a registration number, and they've got any other sets of numbers, none of which necessarily deliver much benefit to them at the end of the day. So I think there are big issues here. I mean, conceptually, it's a good idea, but I think the practicalities are quite significant. And I'm really interested in how GLEIF believes some of those are going to be overcome.
I wouldn't be here if I wouldn't believe in that.
Well said.
There's a lot of detail to that, and I don't want to go too deeply into this. First of all, your passport example, I'm a German, I can travel almost everywhere without a visa, so this has obviously something to do with trust. Some countries trust others more than others, and trust is a very important component in everything what we're doing. And to your point, the LEI system is not this rich content that you need to do all your verifications and validations. The LEI is a very small brick in this whole wall that helps solving one issue in particular. And that is, very simple put, DUNS number, perm ID, company ID from S&P, your customer, you want to source from all three suppliers. They all have their own identity scheme. And what do? You need to rely on the mapping, or you create the mapping yourself. And then you have tons of other sources that you pull in. Now, the LEI is considered to be nothing else than a linchpin through all these other sources. And let me give you one example. In the LEI files, which are broad public good, everybody can use this, we already carry the registration number of the authoritative source that conferred the identity in the first place, like a company house ID or a tax ID in Mexico and others. So by creating this link between registries, between data sources, people can then start to develop product around this with all the richness of the data that, for instance, you need in KYC.
Would you like to?
Yeah, I would just add a little bit to what the other panelists has mentioned, is that when it comes to adoption, from what I see here in Asia Pac, is there must be a motivation by the regulators in particular. So the regulators see LEI as a solution that can solve some of the industry issue. So take, for example, Singapore has adopted LEI for the OTC derivatives reporting back in 2014. And that is, I think, a very good move, given the fact that Singapore has a big market and for trading in derivatives in Asia Pac. So what the regulators see is that having an LEI would prevent something like what has happened during the Lehman crisis. In recent years, again in Asia Pac, the Malaysian Central Bank, they have also adopted the LEI system, and that is applicable to the government bonds. So anyone who purchased the Malaysian government securities will need an LEI. That actually helped the regulators to see who is who, as that's the main concern. In a monetary policy of a central bank, they would like to know who's the biggest holder of the government securities. So I guess the motivation for an LEI adoption hinges a lot on regulation, but as we all are here, we hope that more and more companies look at the benefit of an LEI and through the various channels that you can issue an LEI and make it a very useful identification.
Thank you. Well, I have two hats here. So one is I'm a member of the industry, and I feel compassionate about transparency. So I support any move to create greater transparency. You go back to a metaphor of the old sea captains who were really venture capitalists in the 1700s or even before. Their task was not just to explore the world and to trade in spices. They were told to bring back maps. In other words, draw maps from their coastal areas, which they discovered. And there was a central point. A man called Waldsee Müller, Alsace guy, who created the first global map. And they all brought these pieces to Waldsee Müller. And matter of fact, in that first map, which showed the American continent, and he called it, the discoverer was Vespucci, Amerigo Vespucci, and so that Waldsee Müller called it America. So the point is, can we have a mechanism like everybody brings back these, 21 data elements and say, I'm out there trading, and I bring it back and somebody will maps it in, and then everybody can use it. Let me finish, you can comment afterwards. Or is that ludicrous? Okay, the next point I'm making is this. In this space where you started, or where the Financial Stability Board said, create the lie, some of our industry members ramped up their databases from 200 million companies to 300. And you went from 1 to 1.5 million. And so I cannot see any light at the end of the tunnel that you will ever get in a reasonable time to do what we actually want with like to have a better transparency, particularly on the smaller companies to help financial inclusion, for instance. The other point is, I see fragmentation rather than coming together. The US government decided they didn't want the dunce number anymore, and they didn't even want the lie either, so which comes, with recommendation from the Financial Stability Board, and they want their own number. So with this kind of stuff going on, is there any hope that you will make any progress?
May I start?
Yeah.
First of all, it was just one agency in the United States, while 10 others worked together with the LEI. That's the situation right now in the US. Second, with the McKinsey study, we have now the hope that we can intrigue those who have 200 million on file to work together with us to boost the number very quickly. And number three, and I think that's where our ambition really lies. When you look at the financial sector, and we heard about derivatives and others and traders and counterparties and so on and so forth, I call this a galaxy, the finance galaxy, like the Milky Way is our home galaxy, right? But there's Andromeda out there crashing into us. And this Andromeda, we have actually two galaxies coming to us. One is the supply chain galaxy. Think of it. Every shipment, every production of good goes this way. The payment stream goes the other way. Then you have trade finance. They're all not linked together. They have all different methods, identifiers, allocation rules, so on and so forth. Wouldn't it bring a lot to all of us if those chains would be connected? And the reason why everybody wants to connect things, and that's the third galaxy, that is the internet. Again, you have all kinds of identifiers, standards, and so on and so forth, where people, identify themselves. We all have an Apple ID or a Google ID or Amazon ID. Again, we need to bring these galaxies together in order to really help people to do their business in a much more faster and much more transparent way.
All right, over to you. Over to you.
So I'm struggling between the two analogies of the map and the galaxy, but I'm going to try to bring this together a little bit. The map is a great example of curating information that had ground truth. They went and they observed something that they were not part of, they recorded it, and then they came back and put those pieces together. Presumably, putting aside earthquakes, the continents weren't moving, the islands weren't moving. You were going and observing something that was static. Where the analogy breaks down is the incredibly dynamic nature, especially of small and medium business. So we have to be really careful with analogy, because then it's abstraction and we can fall in love with the poetry and miss the realities. I love the analogy, and I wish it were true. We're talking about information that is self-reported about self. And that's also a problem, because we don't always see ourselves the way others see us. I am very handsome, thin, young, you know. The reality is sometimes like that weird guy up there on the screen. So, and that's when we're trying to tell the truth. And I don't mean to sound, you know, overly sarcastic, but everyone doesn't tell the truth. So there's that as well. So we have to deal with these realities. The Galaxy thing, I think, is exactly the problem, that in addition to the incredibly dynamic nature of even truth tellers, you have the incredibly dynamic nature of the ecosystem. Logic would dictate that a solution needs to be equally dynamic in order to be effective. So we have to be very careful with anything that says, well, just, and this, I have a numbering system. I'm not trying not to talk about our own commercial space. This is not me from my company talking. This is me as a scientist talking. Numbers alone only work when the ground truth is relatively static. We're not talking about a relatively static thing here. So we have to recognize the dynamic nature of it. As far as governments saying we're going to issue our own numbers, they issue their own numbers, but then if you look at the fine print, and we'll retain all those other numbers somewhere in our, you think they're going to change all the thousands of systems that they have? That's not happening. So everybody wants a number. I would love to have a number. I spend crazy money doing identity resolution. It's never over. It is my biggest headache. It is a curse. It's also an incredibly interesting challenge. Never going to go away. Always going to change.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I'm not sure there's a huge amount I can add to that. I think, Stephan, you said you didn't want to get into details, understand that, but unfortunately, the devil is in the detail here. Look, as I said earlier, I think the concept is great, but I think sitting underneath that is a huge amount of complexity. I think that, as Anthony has said, you know, identities are constantly changing. You know, particularly corporate structures, constantly changing. Yeah, we have a database of 50 million public companies globally within Refinitiv. We estimate that between 40 and 50% of their companies have some significant change to their corporate structure during that period of time. I think, you know, if this is simply about getting a number out there that the industry can then use to innovate around and build the connectivity, et cetera, then fine, let's just get governments and banks to issue an LEI to everybody that comes in contact with them at the end of the day, and then we'll see whether the industry has the momentum to adopt it and to actually create value from it. But I do think this is about detail. I do think that it's about, if you're going to make this work, it's about mass adoption. I come back to what I said earlier in KYC. Okay, if I'm a company, particularly if I'm an SME, then I need to know that if I get an LEI, it's going to make my life easier. If it doesn't make my life easier, then why bother? Okay, and I think that is the biggest challenge. If it doesn't make my life easier, then why would I bother to get it? And I think until we've answered some of those questions, I think we'll find ourselves in the position we're in today. The 1.5 million LEIs issued to date benefited significantly from the MiFID regulation. Okay, more recently, if you go to GLEIF's website, you'll see that the rate of new issuances declined quite significantly. Yes, the next wave of regulation will push something else out. But at the moment, none of that is creating the linkages. That's just a method of reporting. That's just a method of, another method of identification. So I look forward to continuing the conversation. I don't think we're anywhere close to the answers at the moment. I don't think the LEI is going to go away, but I think we'll continue to have some interesting debates.
Well, thank you. We almost run out of time. And before I finalize this conversation, I allow you wait one more pitch.
Yeah, a few more information to give you hope that the LEI will prosper. Number one, in Europe, we will see a regulation coming that all filings of financial statements must be in XBRL with embedded LEIs that addresses every CFO out there. And we see certain discussions already in other jurisdictions. So we have a very good working relationship with XBRL International. We're working together with GS1 on creating a standard into the GS1 world of barcodes. Everybody knows the barcode on every product. That's the code used for products and producers and everything else. We're working on an integration there. And last but not least, we've been working together with standardization bodies like ISO and ETSI and others to create a standard for the inclusion of LEIs in digital identities, digital certificates. And there are a number of national schemes out there where you can get your ID from the government, and the LEI can become part of that. And on our website, you see already first examples, what you can do as a owner of such a certificate in a legally sound way, signing contracts, signing everything. So all of that we're working on, but it's too much detail for today, I believe. But maybe next time.
The time is up and it's red. I got the red card. But before we close, I would like to show a hand from the audience. Should we continue as an industry association with this discussion in another session, in another time? Hands, if yes. Thank you. Okay, with that, I thank everybody for coming and participating in this very dynamic forum, and we see you again. Thank you. Thank you.